Happy 4th of July. Great to see everybody here. Secretary Austin, my battle buddy, Secretary Wormuth, SMA, Chairman, Vice. Great to have everybody here. I want to take a minute first to welcome our very, very special guest. First, Miss Theresa Chandler, great-great-granddaughter of Private Wilson. Miss Chandler's sister, Joyce Dursum, down there, see Joyce. Other sister, Charlene Murphy, who's here with us. Miss Chandler's son, Scott, and also Kim Chandler. And I understand they're all from Ohio, and we've gotten past the whole Ohio State Buckeye conversation that we just had. And the rest, I know there's a bunch of other family members here. Welcome to the Pentagon and welcome to D.C. And from Private Shadrach's family, Mr. Gerald Taylor, his great-great-nephew. Sir, great to have you here. Mr. Gerald Taylor, his Mr. Taylor's daughter, Penny, who's here with us, and Brian Taylor, and the rest of the Shadrach family. So, again, great to have you here. And I know it was a big commitment to travel all the way here to D.C., especially on Independence Day, and pretty busy around this city. But despite the hustle and bustle, I think it's fitting that we do this ceremony today in honor. We have 248 years, and it's in part because of courageous Americans like Private Wilson and Private Shadrach, and we're here to remember their incredible story. So it's April 1862. 24 courageous young men from Ohio set out from Murfreesboro, Tennessee, on a daring mission for which they'd willingly volunteered. They were led by a civilian man named James Andrew, and so dubbed Andrew's Raiders. The men traveled deep behind enemy lines, nearly 200 miles southward. They went in twos and threes to remain inconspicuous along highways and through the mountains, stopping in towns along the way for food and shelter, telling the Southerners they met that they were headed to Georgia to enlist in the Confederate Army. They were unarmed, in unfamiliar lands, and unable to easily contract Andrews. If they roused any suspicion, they'd be done. I'm imagining a soldier undertaking that kind of journey behind enemy lines today. It would take a lot of guts. The team's plan was to steal a train in Georgia, ride it north to Chattanooga, and do as much damage as possible to the track along the way. Because that rail line was the lifeblood of the Confederate Army in Tennessee, and the Raiders knew that if it were destroyed, General Mitchell and his Union soldiers stood a much better chance at taking Chattanooga. It was a harrowing mission. Andrew's Raiders convened in Marietta, Georgia, just north of Atlanta, and boarded their chosen train bravely, ready for the unknown road ahead. At first, the ride was quiet. A few stops on at Big Shanty Station, north of Marietta, the engineer and the rest of the train crew stopped for breakfast at a local hotel. The Union men peered out of their train cars. There was a Confederate encampment nearby, and the town was crawling with enemy soldiers. This would be their only chance, and they had to move fast. The men uncoupled the passenger cars, snuck into the locomotive, and threw the throttle. The General, as the train was called, bit the track and threw up sparks. Then it steamed out of the station with an enormous racket, raising the alarm of the crew and the nearby enemy troops. As the men rode north, they stopped several times to cut telegraph lines and pry up the track with crowbars. And I can imagine what kind of work that is, trying to pry up the track and cut down the things that they had with the handheld tools. All along the route, there were Confederate encampments and soldiers. With every stop to damage the line, the Raiders knew they risked their discovery and their capture. Still, the men worked on, dutifully, tirelessly, and courageously, focused on the mission. They tended the engine, cut the lines, worked on the track, and navigated other traffic along the route. Eventually, though, the train crew pursuing them closed the distance, and the General started to lose steam. Just 18 miles from Chattanooga, the Raiders were forced to abandon the train and disperse into the woods. Unfortunately, all were captured. Rightfully, the raiders of the Great Locomotive Chase were recognized as heroes throughout the Union. The survivors were summoned to Washington, D.C. to receive medals of honor. But due to some unknown oversight, Privates Shadrach and Wilson were not duly recognized. Now, 162 years later, we are setting that straight. Because these two men deserve their place in American history and in Army history. Private Shadrach and Private Wilson understood the grave risk ahead of them, yet they valiantly volunteered to go, to undertake a terrifying journey into enemy territory and attempt this bold and important task. It took incomparable courage, but they committed it for the cause and for their country. That kind of personal courage is at the heart of our Army, stewarded by soldiers like Shadrach and Wilson, and many exceptional men and women that have served and sacrificed in the years since. And it is codified in our creed that we will always place the mission first, never accept defeat, never quit. Today we live in an extremely volatile and interconnected world. A spark in any region could have global impacts. Battlefield technology is rapidly evolving and our adversaries are growing increasingly bold. Our Army, and our nation faces many challenges. And this is nothing new. Facing challenges is what we do. And our formation today are filled with soldiers like Shadrach and Wilson, who are willing to go into the unknown when asked and undertake whatever they are asked to do. They have discipline, take initiative, and fight on towards the mission with uncommon grit. Soldiers today draw inspiration from stories like this one, which remind us of our Army's legacy of valor, and that American soldiers stand ready to defend the Constitution and our way of life, no matter the risk. Thanks again for being here. This will defend. Happy Independence Day.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Secretary of the Army.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, General George, for the account of the extraordinary events that bring us here today. And thank you, Secretary Austin, for joining us in honoring these American heroes. It's a privilege, I think, for all of us to begin this Independence Day together as we remember and honor the courage, sacrifice, and patriotism of Private Philip G. Shadrach and Private George D. Wilson. As General George recounted the remarkable story of this operation in 1862, it struck me just how exceptional these two soldiers really were. We know from Army records that Private Shadrach was born in Pennsylvania and joined Company K of the 2nd Ohio Volunteer Infantry Regiment at the age of 21. Although orphaned at an early age, he found another family in the men of the 2nd Ohio and the Andrews Raiders. Private Shadrach is described as having blue eyes that sparkled with mischief. It was that mischief and sense of humor that kept his fellow Raiders in good spirits and full of laughter despite the hardships of their mission together. We also know about Private Wilson, who was born in Ohio and served in Company B of the 2nd Ohio Volunteer Infantry Regiment. He was 31 years old when he joined the Andrews Raiders, almost a decade older than the rest of the men. By all accounts, he was the most intelligent and well-spoken of the group, although he had no formal education. Like Shadrach, he was well loved by the other members of the raiding party, frequently the historical documents telling us starting energetic discussions or leading debates on a variety of topics. The qualities of these two men, their loyalty to a united nation, their selfless service in the Army, their bravery and courage as they seized the enemy locomotive, and the close camaraderie they had with the other members of the raiding party are qualities shared by generations of American soldiers. The values that drove these men are the same values that have driven soldiers since the Revolutionary War and to the beaches of Normandy. values that continue to live on today in the men and women that are currently serving in our Army. When the last members of the Andrews Raiders were released from captivity, they provided a full report of the operation and the executions of Private Shadrach and Private Wilson. President Lincoln personally met with the survivors. The account that the survivors gave of the courageous acts of the raid, the toll that their imprisonment took on them, and the ultimate sacrifice that some members of the raiding team made deeply affected the president. He remarked, quote, with much feeling, that their stories served as an example of the strong characteristics of the American soldier. For over a century, stories of the Andrews Raiders carried a footnote next to the names of Private Shadrach and Private Wilson, that unlike the other 19 soldiers on the raid, these two men did not receive the Medal of Honor. Generations, I think, of Shadrachs and Wilsons may have wondered over the years, why was this the case? Were Private Shadrach and Private Wilson, in fact, not heroes? But yesterday, as the President presented the two Medals of Honor, he put these doubts to rest and removed that footnote from the history books. From now on, there will be no doubt in the family stories or in the historical record that these two men were, in fact, heroes. Heroes who served with courage and bravery. Heroes who served selflessly and fought for a united country. Heroes who made a great sacrifice for our nation. And these doubts could not have been put to rest without the work of family members, historians, and elected representatives who've devoted years to verifying what actually took place and ensuring that these acts of heroism received the recognition that they deserved. Many of you here today were involved in that effort. Thank you for your persistence, your dedication, and your commitment to ensuring that Private Shadrach and Private Wilson receive the honor and recognition that they are due. While the character of conflict has changed many times since 1862, and our Army looks very different than it did back then, the values that Private Shadrach and Private Wilson exemplified in life and upheld even as they were being put to death remain the values that all American soldiers strive to embody. Today's ceremony is an opportunity to recognize and celebrate these two men for their heroic actions 162 years ago. But it's also a moment to rededicate ourselves and recommit to the values that they represented: duty, courage, loyalty, honor, service, and integrity. Today, July 4th, our country's Independence Day, is the perfect day to recommit ourselves to the values that Private Shadrach and Wilson stood for, the values that lie at the heart of our great Army as we continue to protect and defend this great nation. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Secretary of Defense.
Well, good morning and happy 4th of July. It is indeed an honor to welcome you to the Hall of Heroes. Secretary Wormuth, General George, thanks for your moving words. Along with Sergeant Major of the Army Weimer, thanks for leading the United States Army with such skill and professionalism. I'm also pleased to see so many outstanding Department of Defense and Army leaders with us today. And let me also thank our honored guest today, the families of Private Philip Shadrach and Private George Wilson. You are the bridge back to their bravery. You carry their legacy. And we're deeply grateful to have you here. It's a huge honor to hold this ceremony on Independence Day. Every 4th of July, we celebrate our founding values of freedom, democracy, and the rule of law. And by gathering today, we remind ourselves of how much it took to turn those principles into human government. Just a few generations after we won our freedom from the British Crown, our new republic was ripped apart. In his Independence Day message in 1861, President Lincoln said that our American experiment was struggling against those who fought to put an end to free government upon earth. And we have gathered to salute two of the bravest soldiers ever to fight for free government, Private Shadrach and Private Wilson. In 1862, as you've heard, the civilian scout James J. Andrews convinced the commander of the Union forces in central Tennessee to try to steal a train and use it to rip up the railroad behind it and cut off the rebels' ability to resupply their forces from Atlanta. The men we honor today raised their hands for that stunning raid. And one comrade remembered that Private Shadrach was solidly built, merry, and reckless, with an inexhaustible store of good nature. Yet his brothers in arms could count on him, as one said, to sacrifice anything for a friend. Other soldiers said that Private Wilson was tall and spare, with high cheekbones and sharp gray eyes. And his battle buddies felt from him a greatness of soul which sympathized intensely with our struggle for national life. On April 12th, Private Shadrach, Private Wilson, and the rest of the Andrews Raiders set off. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and far behind enemy lines. But when the time came, they seized the locomotive from under the noses of the Confederate troops. It was a painfully thrilling moment, one of the raiders recalled. We were but 20, with an army about us and a long, difficult road before us, crowded with enemies. So they sped away, racing against their pursuers, racing against time, and racing against fate. The Union raiders tore up the tracks behind them. They ripped down the telegraph cables above them, and they damaged key transportation and communication lines. But the raiders soon ran out of fuel and out of luck. And Private Shadrach and Private Wilson were among the first to be captured. And a Confederate military court sentenced them to hang. Private Shadrach told his fellow prisoners that he sought comfort in his faith. Private Wilson's thoughts also turned to his trust in God and to his belief in America. One account says that Wilson was surrounded by a scowling crowd, but he spoke to them while standing under the gallows. And Private Wilson told that angry crowd that they would yet see the time when the old Union would be restored and when its flag would wave over them again. And he was right. And on this 4th of July, our flag still waves over the free citizens of the United States of America. And as you've heard, nearly a year after the Andrews raid, Secretary of War Edwin Stanton welcomed the surviving raiders to Washington. And he presented them with a newly created award for valor, making them the first U.S. service members to receive the Medal of Honor. And today, more than 160 years later, we complete that arc of history. And we link the first recipients of the Medal of Honor to the newest recipients of the Medal of Honor. The names of Private Philip Shadrach and Private George Wilson will be inscribed forever in the Hall of Heroes alongside their fellow Raiders. Their medals are new, yet their bravery is eternal. On this Independence Day, their story reminds us of the American patriots who risked everything for our freedom and for our union and for our future of liberty under law. Their story doesn't just inspire us, it challenges us. So we are not just here to honor their sacrifice, we are here to live up to their example. Democracy is a daily referendum. It's not just a consequence of grand actions, but the sum of small decisions. And that's true every day, and not just on the 4th of July. Democracy is never a thing done, an American poet once wrote. Democracy is always something that a nation must be doing. So it is always the right time to salute America's independence. It is always the right time to reaffirm America's values. And it is always the right time to honor America's heroes. May God bless the memories of Private Philip Shadrach and Private George Wilson. And may God continue to bless the United States of America. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated during the presentations. The President of the United States of America, authorized by Act of Congress, March 3, 1863, has posthumously awarded in the name of Congress the Medal of Honor to Private Philip G. Shadrach and Private George D. Wilson for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of their lives above and beyond the call of duty. Private Philip G. Shadrach and Private George D. Wilson distinguished themselves by acts of gallantry and intrepidity above and beyond the call of duty while serving with the 2nd Ohio Volunteer Infantry in Georgia on 12 April 1862. Private Shadrach and Private Wilson were two of 22 Andrews Raiders who, by direction of Major General Ormsby M. Mitchell, penetrated nearly 200 miles south into enemy territory. Upon capturing a railroad train at Big Shanty in Georgia, the group set out to complete their mission of disrupting enemy supply lines by destroying bridges and tracks between Chattanooga and Atlanta. Private Shadrach and Private Wilson's gallant actions in close contact with the enemy were in keeping with the highest traditions of military service and reflect great credit upon themselves, the Army of the Ohio, and the United States Army. For the presentations, we invite Secretary Austin, Secretary Wormuth, General George, Sergeant Major Weimer, and Private Shadrach's great-great-nephew, Mr. Gerald Taylor, joined by Mr. Brian Taylor, on the stage. Secretary Wormuth will now present Mr. Gerald Taylor with a framed photo of Private Shadrach and Medal of Honor citation. At this time, the Medal of Honor flag will be presented. On 23 October 2002, Public Law 107-248, Section 8143, established the Medal of Honor flag to recognize service members who have distinguished themselves by gallantry in action above and beyond the call of duty. The Medal of Honor flag commemorates the sacrifice and bloodshed of our freedoms and gives emphasis to the Medal of Honor being the highest award for valor by an individual serving in the armed forces of the United States. The light blue color, with gold fringe bearing 13 white stars, are adapted from the Medal of Honor ribbon. Thank you, Taylor family. We invite Private Wilson's great-great-granddaughter, Miss Theresa Chandler, joined by Mr. Scott Chandler and Miss Kim Chandler, to the stage. Secretary Wormuth will now present Miss Chandler with a framed photo of Private Wilson and Medal of Honor citation. At this time, the Medal of Honor flag will be presented to Miss Chandler. Thank you, Secretary Austin, Secretary Wormuth, General George, and Sergeant Major Weimer. Will the Taylor family join the Chandler family on the stage for the unveiling? The Medal of Honor plaque will now be unveiled, inducting Private Shadrach and Private Wilson into the Hall of Heroes. Thank you, Taylor family and Chandler family. At this time, please direct your attention to the screen as a soldier unveils the names of Private Shadrach and Private Wilson on the Medal of Honor garden wall at the National Museum of the United States Army. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Brian Taylor.
Good morning, and thank you very much. Esteemed leadership and military members and families of Private George Wilson, my name is Brian Taylor, and I am the great-great-great-nephew of Private Philip Shadrach from Company K of the 2nd Ohio Infantry and one of Andrew's raiders who took part in the Great Locomotive Chase of April 12th, 1862. I am also proud to be able to say for the very first time that as of yesterday, and the reason that we're here today, is that Private Shadrach is one of the newest recipients of the Medal of Honor along with Private Wilson. When my Uncle Gerald Taylor, who received the medal from President Biden yesterday, asked me to give this speech today, I was not only honored to be able to speak for the descendants of Private Shadrach, but also more than a little bit scared. Not scared of the prospect of standing in front of you all, but a little bit more scared about being just able to articulate how our family is feeling at this moment. I think I can sum up our collective feelings in the following way. As well as being deeply overwhelmed by the attention that was directed our way, we feel a deep gratitude to the government and the U.S. military who have expended such energy and shown such love toward our fallen uncle. Just the sheer number of military members who spoke with us yesterday following the medal ceremony was astounding. The congratulations, thanks, and appreciation toward their fallen comrade from a war which ended many years ago made us all exceptionally proud to be a Shadrach relative. I want to let you know on a little bit of an inside family joke that we've had for a very long time. Private Shadrach never really seemed to be the right thing to call our ancestor, nor did Uncle Shadrach, or Perry like he liked to be known. So at some point, probably 20 years ago, we started calling him Uncle Stealer, an homage to him stealing the train. Once we lovingly started calling him by this nickname, everyone in the family knew exactly who we were talking about right away. As Uncle Stealer died at such a young age, only 21 when he was executed, we don't have a lot of personal information about who he was as a person. What we've been able to learn through a few family stories and historical information leads us to the following conclusions. We believe that he was a young man who was deeply proud of his country and the cause of the Union. He volunteered for a mission that he likely knew nothing about in advance, and once the mission was laid out in the days prior to April 12th, he followed through with what he had volunteered to do, even though he must have known that his capture meant almost certain death. As with many of the Union soldiers, his dedication to the abolition of slavery most certainly informed his decision-making. Bravery, and likely a touch of youthful bravado, also seemed to round out his personality. My father, Doug Taylor, who started this seemingly uphill battle to have the medal awarded, is not able to be here with us today because of ill health. I cannot imagine that when he started sending mail, faxes, and later emails when he learned to use his computer, to anyone who would listen, that he actually believed that 20-plus years down the road, the medal would actually be awarded, 162 years after Andrew's raid took place. I've been in contact with him a lot over the last several days, and I can hear in his voice the satisfaction at the culmination of his hard work and dedication. Not to be forgotten in this endeavor are the contributions of our cousin, Ron Shadrach. Ron really took up the reins in 2012 when he enlisted the help of the incredibly gifted historian, Brad Quinlan, to help get the final push done. Thank you both so very much for this. Our family hopes that the bravery and dedication to both country and humanity shown by both new Medal of Honor recipients will serve as an example to future generations, bringing people together rather than seeing them as the other, believing in a cause that is greater than the individual, and being strong in the face of adversity are all things that we can strive for. Private Philip Gebhard Shadrach, Perry, Uncle Stealer, you are remembered and loved. Thank you for your contribution to the reuniting of the country and the principle that all people are created equal with the rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. Ladies and gentlemen, Miss Theresa Chandler.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Theresa Chandler, the great-great-granddaughter of George Davenport Wilson. Thank you. My children take care of me. Distinguished leaders, distinguished guests, and members of my family. We have been brought here together to bring honor and recognition to my great-great-grandfather, George Davenport Wilson, Private First Class of the 2nd Company, Ohio Volunteers. His heroic actions have earned him our nation's highest military honor, the Medal of Honor. George was highly intellectual and well-traveled. He was a man of strong convictions with an intense passion to serve his country. He was unwavering in his commitment to assist in the preservation of the Union and the elimination of slavery. Given his incredible spirit and his love of country, he served in the Union Army and eventually volunteered to serve as a member of the Andrews Raiders. Despite knowing the dangers, George and his fellow soldiers committed to what is known to be the first special operations mission of its time and the mission to take Chattanooga. In what is now known as the Great Locomotive Chase, George and his fellow soldiers exhibited extraordinary valor, courage, and an unwavering commitment to the mission. Unfortunately, the mission was abruptly ended as the general ran out of tinder and steam. George and 7 other members of Andrew Raiders would ultimately be captured, tortured, tried, and convicted as spies. As a result, they would all make the ultimate sacrifice for the service of their country. History shares with us George's last words as he stood on the gallows on that fateful day. He states, he did not regret dying for his country, and that the time would come when the Union would be restored and the American flag would wave over the entire nation once again. Today, Independence Day is not only a time to celebrate our nation, but to also acknowledge that George's convictions on that fateful day, despite paying the ultimate sacrifice, came true. We remain one nation, under one flag, with the ideals and the values of freedom, for all that continues to be a significant part of this country's greatness. On behalf of my family, we extend our sincere gratitude for the recognition of my great-great-grandfather, George Davenport Wilson. We are grateful for the opportunity to honor and share his legacy for generations to come. Our family is deeply humbled to receive the Medal of Honor on his behalf and for the opportunity to recognize, celebrate, and memorialize George's incredible and extraordinary valor in his service to this great country. Thank you so much for this incredible honor.
Thank you, Ms. Chandler. Ladies and gentlemen, please stand and join in the singing of the Army Song. The words to the Army Song can be found in your program.
March along, sing our song with the army of the free. Count the brave, count the true, who have fought to victory. We're the army and proud of our name. We're the army and proudly proclaim. First to fight for the right and to build the nation's might, and the army goes rolling along. Proud of all we have done, fighting till the battle's won, and the army goes rolling along. Then it's hi, hi, hey, the army's on its way. Count off the cadence loud and strong. For where we go, you will always know that the army goes rolling along.
Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes the Medal of Honor induction ceremony. Please remain in place for the departure of the official party.